Have you ever asked yourself,
How the f do I play Grimdark Future by one-page rules?
if so, you're in the right darn place, my friend. Welcome to the Dankest Dungeon. My name is Jason, and in this video I'm going to show you everything you need to know to play a game of Grimdark Future, also known as the free-to-play version of Warhammer 40k. So I got into Warhammer pretty hot and heavy at the end of 7th edition, and at the time I thought the rules were kind of not fun, but then 8th edition came out and I was like, wow, this is like a big improvement. And Games Workshop really seemed to be taking constructive criticism of their game and pushing it in a good direction. So I was super hyped all the way through 8th edition, but then 9th edition happened. And it was just kind of like the same old bullshit. The game is bloated as shit. The game takes way too long. The game is way too expensive. Compound this all together, and despite how invested I am time-wise and monetarily, I just don't think I like the game. So today we're going to be looking at one-page rules, a possible alternative to Warhammer 40,000, so I can at least still play with my minis while Games Workshop hopefully gets their together and makes a good game with 10th edition. So if you've ever played a tabletop miniature game, you probably have a pretty good idea on how Grimdark Future plays out. You get some miniatures to represent your science fiction based army, you move them around on the table by measuring distances with rulers or tape measures, and you roll some dice to determine their attacks and defense and hits and saves. This game is basically a heavily stripped down version, or you might say a heavily unbloated version of Warhammer 40,000. Because of this streamlining, it's easier to learn, easier and faster to play, and bonus, you can use whatever miniatures you want to. The game is miniatures agnostic, so whatever miniature brand or 3D printed minis or combination thereof that you think does a good job of representing the army that you're bringing to the table is completely up to you. The game was created with 28mm scale minis on round basis in mind, so try to remember that when assembling your army. How big is that? So 28 millimeters, how big? I really have no fucking idea. Warhammer size. If you have any Warhammer 40,000 armies, they are basically plug and play here. Most of the factions in Grimdark Future are obvious copy and pastes of Warhammer units, with rules tweaked for the new system. Is that a card effects on your side of the table? Nah man, that's a Carnivo Rex. Oh alright, I got you. But that person over there, that's a Hexmark Destroyer from the Necrons, right? Are you crazy? That's a Tri-Scorpion Pistolier of the Robot Legions, my dude. Oh, okay. I see what's happening here. If you have a 3D printer, One Page Rules also sells some really nice quality 3D print files for some of the armies, with more always on the way. Alright, so that's some of the more general overview. Now we're going to get more into the nitty gritty. So for in-game purposes, individual models are called models, and groups of models are called units. Some units can be made up of only one model, such as this big fella, so they are a model and a unit simultaneously as far as the rules are concerned. Each unit has a list of traits that determine what they can do in game. A unit's quality is the number you have to roll at or above to succeed with attack or morale rolls. Defense is the number you need to roll at or above to fend off incoming attacks. Equipment, as you might guess, are the weapons and such that the unit is equipped with. Special rules represent any special abilities the unit may have, if any. Upgrades can be purchased to give additional equipment and special rules. You can only purchase upgrades from the categories listed for the unit. Refer to the tables below the unit listings for all of the options these give you access to. Finally, cost is, you guessed it, how many points the unit costs to field. Dice play a big role in the game, as they should. The game uses 6-sided dice exclusively, often referred to as D6. So get a handful or 2 of these and you should be good to go. A lot of the rules in the game will refer to D6 or variations thereof, such as 2D6, which would be rolling 2 dice at once and then adding them together, or D6 plus 1, which would require you to roll 1 dice and then add 1 to whatever the total is. Sometimes there will even be a cheeky little D3 thrown in. And how can you roll a D3 on a D6, you might ask? Just roll 1 D6 and then have the roll, rounding up. There you go, D3. Some abilities will let you re-roll dice, so if you roll low on some dice, you can get another chance. Dice may only ever be re-rolled once in this way, and you must keep the re-rolled result even if it's worse than the original result. Roll-offs can also occur during the game. These function exactly how you think they would. Both players roll a dice, and the higher number wins. In the case of ties, just keep re-rolling until someone rolls higher. Dice rolls can be modified up and down by various rules and abilities. For example, a unit being in cover reduces opposing quality rolls to hit with shooting weapons by 1. Regardless of modifiers, unmodified 6s are always successful and unmodified 1s always fail. Alongside rolling dice, another thing you'll be doing a lot in Grimdark Future is measuring distances. Your units move a certain number of inches. Models within units must remain a certain number of inches next to each other. Your guns fire up to a certain distance in inches, and so on. So with that said, you should probably have something that measures inches, either a tape measure or a ruler. When measuring movement, always measure from the same spot of a model's base or hole from the beginning and end of the movement. So front to front or back to back. Never front to back, since that would make your model actually move more than its maximum movement. You could technically do back to front, I guess, if you wanted to move less than your movement, but I don't know why you would do that. As for weapons, there are 2 different categories in Grimdark Future, ranged weapons and melee weapons. If the weapon has a range listed, it's a ranged weapon. If it doesn't have a range listed, then it is a melee weapon and can only be used in melee after charging or being charged. Speaking of ranged weapons, to determine line of sight with your ranged weapons, your models can see in all directions. The direction the model's facing doesn't actually matter for this. If you can draw a straight line from the base or hole of your model to the base or hole of another model without passing through any solid obstacles, including other units, then congrats, you have line of sight. Okay, so those are the basics. Let's go ahead and get a table set up and ready to play. So to start off with, you and your opponent are going to need to agree on a point total so you know how many points you can have when building your armies. There currently isn't really a standard point value at which games are played for Grimdark Future, so just pick a point value, say 1,000 points to start with, and adjust from there to find the size that hits the sweet spot for you. If you're coming from Warhammer and like playing the standard 2,000 point 40k games, I would suggest fielding somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 points for Grimdark Future. Once you have your point total chosen, build your army by purchasing units and upgrades until you meet or get as close to the number as possible without going over. You gotta stay under, not even 1 point over. That's called cheating. One Page Rules even has an army builder website app called Army Forge. You can find that here, and I'll also put this down in the description below so you don't have to type that in. Kudos to One Page Rules for succeeding on this front where Games Workshop has failed so miserably. One side note, you might notice that the rules on the Army Builder are different from the rules PDFs on their website. This is because the app actually uses the Grimdark Future 2.5 beta rules, so they're not actually official at the time of posting this video. But hey, personally, I'm going to use them anyways because it's so much easier using the app than writing this crap down and doing the math myself. The standard table size for a game of Grimdark Future is 4 feet by 6 feet. I don't have a table that big anymore after Warhammer reduced their table size for their game, so this slightly smaller table space will have to do. I'm sure it'll be fine. Deployment zones for armies are always 12 inches along the long table edges on each side. You're going to want to throw down 10 to 15 pieces of terrain, or more if you like more. You're just going to want enough so that there's a good amount of cover for units to hide behind and move between as they're moving up the board, so everyone just doesn't die immediately. Be sure to agree before the game starts what terrain rules each piece will have. The primary abilities are cover terrain, difficult terrain, and dangerous terrain. Cover terrain gives units shooting into or across it -1 to their shooting quality tests. Difficult terrain causes models only be able to move a max distance of 6 inches when moving on it or through it. And dangerous terrain is actually pretty dangerous. It causes any models moving through it to have to take a dangerous terrain test. You're going to have to roll a dice for each model that moves through, and on a 1, that unit takes a wound. If a model with tough moves through it, then you must roll a dice for each of its toughness value. So say a unit has tough 6, meaning it basically has 6 wounds, you have to roll 6 dice, and each roll of a 1 causes 1 wound to the model. Ouch. Okay, so that's terrain. Next up, you're going to want to roll a d3 and add 2 to the total. This will be the number of objectives placed for the battle. Roll off with your opponent, the winner places the first objective, and then placement alternates from there. Objectives must be placed outside deployment zones and at least 9 inches away from each other objective. Objectives are super important. The player who controls the most objectives after 4 rounds of play wins the game. So how do you capture objectives? Well, at the end of each round, if a unit is within 3 inches of an objective marker and no enemies are within 3 inches, it is seized. If both players have units on an objective, then it is considered contested and remains neutral. Objectives remain under a player's control even if they move off of the objective, until an opponent's unit successfully seizes the marker for themselves or contests it. Once the objectives are down, it's time for deployment. Roll off again, and the winner picks their side of the table for deployment. They also place the first unit down. Placement then alternates back and forth from there until all units have been deployed. And with that out of the way, it is time to play. The game is broken down into 4 rounds. Each round consists of a player fully activating one of their units, and then their opponent does the same, back and forth until all units have done so. Once every unit has been activated, the next round begins. On each new round, the player that finished all of their activations first in the previous round gets to activate first in the new round. For the first round, the player who won the deployment roll-off gets first activation. When activating a unit, there are several actions they can choose from. They can hold, also known as standing still. If a unit performs a hold action, they can also shoot after doing so. They can advance. This lets the unit move up to 6 inches and change their facing in any direction if they're a vehicle. They can also shoot after advancing. Another option to choose from is rush. This lets a unit move up to 12 inches and change their facing, but they lose the ability to shoot that round. And lastly, a unit can charge. So this lets the unit move up to 12 inches, but they must end with at least one model in the unit within base-to-base contact with an enemy unit. When moving units that consist of more than one model, they must also maintain unit coherency. This means that all models in the unit must stay within 2 inches of at least one other model in the unit, and within 6 inches of every model in the unit. You may never move within 1 inches of other units, friend or foe, unless making a charge move, in which case you must move into base-to-base contact with an enemy unit to make the move to begin with. Also, you may never move through other units, you have to go around. Okay, so you've moved a unit. Now it's time to shoot with them as long as they didn't rush or charge. To shoot, pick an enemy unit to shoot at, see how many of your models have line of sight and are within range, then roll dice equal to their amount of shots trying to score equal to or better than their quality value for successful hits. All models with the same types of weapons must fire at the same enemy. If you have mixed weaponry in the unit, the different weapon profiles may each target a different enemy if you wish. After scoring your hits, your opponent then rolls their defense rolls, rolling 1 dice for each successful hit and trying to meet or exceed their unit's defense value. Each successful defense roll cancels out the corresponding hit. All damage not defended against is then applied to the enemy unit. For most units, each undefended hit will remove 1 model from the unit, except for units with a tough ability, which grants the models more than 1 wound each. For these models, keep track of the total number of wounds taken by placing a dice next to them until they suffer their total wounds, at which point they are removed from play. Once a unit starts taking wounds, you have to continue taking wounds on that model until it's dead. Say you had a unit with multiple tough models in it, you can't just spread the wounds out over all of them. Once one of them starts taking wounds, you just keep taking them on that one until it's dead, and then move on to the next. So that's shooting in a nutshell, but what if you charged instead? To make a charge, you must select one enemy unit that is within 12 inches of your activating unit. You then move all models in your unit up to 12 inches and end their movement as close to the enemy targeted unit as possible, and at least 1 model from your unit must be in base-to-base contact with the enemy unit. If it's not possible to do so, you may not declare the charge. After you make your charge move, the enemy unit must then move all of their models that are not already in base-to-base contact with your unit up to 3 inches to get into base contact, or as close as possible if they are more than 3 inches away. Now the punching happens. Start with the unit who declared the charge. All models in base-to-base contact or within at least 2 inches of the enemy unit may attack with their melee weapons. This works basically in the same way as shooting. You determine the number of attacks you have with your weapons. You roll to hit by meeting or exceeding your quality, and then the enemy rolls to defend by meeting or exceeding their defense quality for each hit. Damage is then applied and casualties are removed. Unlike shooting, however, after casualties are removed, the defending player unit may, if they choose, hit you back. If they choose to return strike, they follow the same attack sequence as before, a la determine the number of attacks, roll to hit, followed by roll to defend, and then casualties from your squad are then removed. Additionally, after the defender has counterattacked, or chosen not to, a winner must be determined for the fight. If one unit caused more wounds than the other, they are declared the winner. The loser must immediately take a morale test. We'll go over morale here in more detail in a minute, but just keep that in mind. Once this has all been resolved, the charging unit must perform a consolidation move. If it completely wiped out the opposing unit, they may move in any direction up to 3 inches. If the defending unit was not completely destroyed, then the charging unit must back up 1 inch so it's no longer in combat with the defending unit. Once any unit has attacked in melee, they become fatigued until the next game round. This means that they only hit on unmodified 6s in subsequent melee combats. This is the primary reason a unit may choose not to return strike after being charged, say if they want to save their full melee profile to use on a different unit in the same round in melee combat. Okay, this brings us to morale, otherwise known as how happy your troops are. Morale tests are taken whenever a unit suffers wounds and the unit is below half its starting size for units with multiple models, or below half its starting toughness value for units with a single model. As mentioned earlier, morale tests are also taken when a unit is declared the loser in a melee fight. To take a morale test, simply roll a quality test for the unit. If the roll is successful, nothing happens and you're good to go. If the roll is failed, several things can happen depending on the situation. If the morale test is taken from wounds caused outside of melee, say shooting, then the unit becomes pinned. Pinned units only hit on 6s in melee and automatically fail morale tests as long as they are pinned. When a pinned unit is activated, they may not perform any actions, but become unpinned at the end of their activation. If a morale test is taken because of melee combat, and the unit is still above half strength, then the unit also becomes pinned. If the unit was below half strength though, then they are routed, or in other words, removed from the game entirely. Oof. And those are all of the basic rules you need to play a game in the Grimdark Future. But there are also many special abilities that units may have that can modify these rules, such as armor penetration values on weapons that reduce the defense characteristic of targeted models, or stealth cloaks that give shooting units -1 to their quality value for hitting them with shooting, or even psychic abilities that may be performed by magically inclined units. Refer to the special rules section of the core rules to get acquainted with these. In Grimdark Future, winning is very straightforward. After 4 rounds of play, the game ends, and whoever currently controls the most objective marker is the winner. Pretty easy, huh? So the rules I've gone over here cover everything in the free basic rulebook that you can find on onepagerules.com. But there is also a full rulebook that can be currently purchased for the incredibly reasonable price of $4.99. This contains loads of extra optional content and advanced rules to expand the game even further. And lastly, I just wanted to shout out onepagerules.com one more time. They are doing God's work here, providing a sleek, free way to play with your minis. If you'd like to support them, be sure to check out their Patreon at patreon.com/onepagerules. And with that said, congrats! You now know how the fuck to play Grimdark Future by One Page Rules. Thanks for watching, everybody. See ya.